Welcome to Roots of Faith. I'm Renee Richard, and today we'll be beginning a new series of shows where we're going to look at the lives of holy people and saints who have visited Louisiana. We'll also look at some of the holy places that are here in Louisiana, such as Grand Coteau or the Cathedral in New Orleans. The lives of some of the saints that are here might be Philippine Duchesne, who is connected with Grand Coteau, Blessed Francis Xavier Sealos, who has his shrine in New Orleans, and of course, St. Teresa of Calcutta, who is dear to the hearts of people here in Baton Rouge. So today we want to talk about what makes you become a saint. So join us on this episode of Roots of Faith. Welcome to the show. My guest today is Father Paul Counts. Father Counts is the pastor of St. Joseph Cathedral Parish here in Baton Rouge. He's also the judicial vicar for the Diocese of Baton Rouge. And Father Counts, welcome to the show.
It's always a pleasure to speak with you, especially about things dear to my heart, which is practically anything involving the church.
The church, that's it. So today we're going to be talking about saints. You know, I know for me, when I think of saints, I think of holy people, and this new series that we're starting are Holy People, Holy Places. Some of them will be saints, some of them will not. Holy people that have walked in Louisiana. But as a kid growing up, I think of saints, as being old, like from earlier generations. And anyway, the whole thing about sainthood. Tell us a little bit about what's involved.
Okay. Well, the very word saint, coming from the Latin word sanctus, means holy. You've already said the word a zillion times already. And it can apply to basically three different categories of people, and one category of non-people. The three categories of people are holy people who walk this earth, who are still alive. In the scriptures, for example, St. Paul especially called all of us saints, if we're good, if we're leading a holy and faith-filled life. There are certainly people who have died, who've passed on from this life, who are now in the presence of God forever in heaven. They're saints, by definition, even if we don't know it. Okay. We celebrate them on All Saints' Day. Oh. And of course, there are the official saints, those who have been especially and carefully nowadays proclaimed by the church to be in the presence of God. We know that by our faith in the church's infallible magisterium. The one category of saints that aren't human are the angels. They have no bodies. They are pure spiritual beings, and the ones at the beginning of their creation made the choice for God are saints. St. Michael the Archangel, St. Gabriel, St. Raphael.
I never thought of
We
that.
call them that because of their complete and utter holiness. But they didn't live on this earth. They weren't human once. Humans don't become angels after they die, but they are holy beings created by God. Those are the categories of saints. Mm-hmm. I'm hesitant to mention the fifth category that some people say, but Pope Francis did a couple of years ago say that somehow, perhaps he said, our pets might be in some way present to us in heavenly glory. But yeah. That's getting pretty speculative, although it is a wonderfully sweet idea.
It is, and a comforting idea if
Sure.
you have pets. So really, when you think of the word saint in today's world as being a Catholic, though, there's a lot more to it, as you were saying.
Well, in the history of the church, at the very, very beginning, as we were trying to evangelize the world, it was widely recognized that many people who had gone before us in faith were in the presence of God forever, were saints. But there wasn't as careful or juridical a process for naming them saints. Rather, by popular acclamation, by popular recognition, people innately knew that St. Peter and St. Paul and the other apostles were saints. And the great figures of the Old Testament, the church affirms that Moses and Elijah and the patriarchs and prophets were also saints. And certainly St. Joseph and Mary, the Blessed Virgin Mary, are understood to be in the presence of God forever. But there was never a formal canonization ceremony or an official naming of these people by the church as saints. It was simply recognized as true over the course of time.
Pretty much by public opinion, too. I think
Acclamation
when I was
is how you
reading
call it.
about it, the general consensus.
And many of these people, in a sense, have a worldwide reputation for being saints. But sometimes the recognition that someone was a saint could be a very, very local thing. When I was in Europe studying in Belgium back in the 1970s, we often traveled the 35, 40-minute train ride over to Aachen, Aix-la-Chapelle, just over the German border. That was where Charlemagne was. Well, he wasn't crowned Holy Roman Emperor. He crowned himself Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day in the year 800. And he is widely regarded as a saint in that part of Germany, Saint Charlemagne, something you wouldn't find anywhere else in Europe, much less America.
That's true, though, because when my son got married in South Korea and we visited the Korean cathedral, Catholic Cathedral in Seoul, the saints that they had in their church are, not known to us. Many of them that were martyrs.
Right. As a matter of fact, sometimes the church has affirmed groups of martyrs, the North American martyrs, the Korean martyrs, the Japanese martyrs, and even the names of each and every one might not be known. In any case, historically, over the course of time, there began to be more and more, centered in Rome, an official process for formally acknowledging and then declaring the holiness, the sanctity, the sainthood of individual people.
That's perfect. Let's take a little break. We're going to come back and explore that. When we left right before break, we were talking about how things have changed in the church, and now there's a formal process that goes through for someone to become a saint. So tell us a little bit about the origin of that and then where we're going with that.
Well, it would take a big research paper to say exactly how it was, say, in 800 and in 1000 and in 1200. Right. But in the late 20th century, under Pope John Paul II, he issued an apostolic constitution called Divinis Perfectionis Magister that basically reordered and standardized the way saints are named today. It sets forth a 5-stage process for naming someone a saint, an official saint of the church. The first is the local process, that which would happen in the diocese. Let's say, René Richard has now passed on, we hope, to eternal glory, but how do we know? Well, then, there would be an investigation. The bishop would designate 2 or 3 people to investigate. One would be on your side, hoping to show how you were a saint. Someone else would be skeptical, professionally skeptical, saying, yeah, but she wasn't perfect. Saints don't have to be perfect. As a matter of fact, as human beings, they can't be perfect. Mary alone accepted. But we would then examine your writings. We would examine all your television shows. We would talk to people in your families, among your friends, people who knew you personally, and develop, in a sense, the story of René.
Right.
That's called the diocesan process. Eventually, all of that is put in writing, and then the second stage of the process moves forward.
Now, at one point there was a waiting period, or do they start the process? I know it used to be they used to say, from what I've read, 5 years after somebody died to give time for the emotions to die down. I mean, that can be wavered, but this process you're talking about where the bishop begins it, is that after the 5 year? I'm just curious.
To be honest, I think that first stage can begin almost immediately, but it can't be concluded for ordinarily 5 years or so. Right. The Holy See can dispense from that 5-year period if they wish to. I believe they did, for example, in the situation of Mother Teresa of Calcutta. But the reasons you just mentioned are precisely those reasons. You want to make sure that your decision eventually is made upon reason and prayerful faith, not just emotion. At the end of the local diocesan process, if the bishop approves, that's who you're trying to convince. Okay. He will then send the entire file with his recommendation, his affirmative recommendation, over to Rome. And it's that point, when the first stage of the process is concluded, that the authorities in Rome will decide to begin or not. Maybe they will want to wait until the end of the 5-year period, or 10 years, or 15 years. The more emotion seems to be involved in a process, the more carefully they're going to study whether they should move forward. It hasn't been a problem with Mother Teresa or St. John Paul II, but I'm sure it's occasionally been an issue in the lives of others. Once it goes to Rome, who does it go to? There is actually a special office in Rome called the Congregation for Saints. It's headed by a cardinal and is made up of cardinals and bishops throughout the world who, a few times a year, gather together, and along with their expert consultors who have read all this stuff and prepared their recommendations, they vote on whether or not to advance the cause of sainthood for this or that particular person. In the case of Saint Renee, the first step that they would move to is whether or not she led a heroic life of virtue, apparently. If they vote in the affirmative, and the Holy Father, the Pope, approves their recommendation, then you would be known as venerable. You would be able to, in the local place where you lived, a devotion could officially spring up toward you. Wouldn't be worldwide, wouldn't even...
Local.
Right, it would be local. Wouldn't even be national in the sense of the United States. It would be within probably just the parish or at least the diocese where you were known. The next stage moves... You have a question?
No, case in point is that I think Henriette de Lyon right now is considered
the venerable.
Venerable at that stage. And, in New Orleans and even here, we have St. Francis Xavier Church, and they've got some beautiful stained glass windows to her and her cause. And her sisters teach here in Baton Rouge, but that's one that is at that stage still.
She would be a very good example, because if you went to Washington State or Maine,
you wouldn't know of her.
You'd never hear about her, much less in any other country. Sometimes the local devotion or cult of a saint does begin to spread a little more widely. I'm thinking of right now the cause for Fulton Sheen, Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who was a native of, I believe, Peoria, but spent most of his ministry in New York State. His is currently under study. Should he be named venerable? And of course, both Peoria, his birthplace, and his diocese of Incarnation, as well as New York, where he was a TV figure and eventually Bishop of Rochester, well, they have a great devotion to him too. So I don't want to say the local devotion is just in one place. It could be in more places. When you're a national public television figure, in a sense, the whole country has an interest in this.
Well, and in the case present, in that case too, he's from one area where they know of him and where he served, and pointing similar to that, and someone that we will be hopefully doing a show on is Margaret Horry. She was the Bread Lady of New Orleans, and they've talked about whether they're going to open her cause or do the work in New Orleans, or whether they're going to do it in her hometown in Ireland. So that that's one where you've got the two now that are connected, but really on a very local level. Because coming from Baton Rouge, I had no idea who she was at all until I worked on a museum exhibit at the Ursuline Convent and learned more about her. So she's one of those that is at the very beginning that we will do a show on, that supposedly lived a holy life, and the process is in the very early stages.
Well, to digress, some saints are very well known widely. Mother Teresa of Calcutta is probably the best example of that, or Pope John Paul II. But the holiness of a person may not extend much beyond a person's family and very local community. And the church officially does not want to exclude, one or the other, or to assume that just because someone was poor and not well known, that we can't determine that they really were holy and deserving of recognition as a saint. Once the cause for sainthood for a person has finished the diocesan stage and the preliminary but very, very exhaustive Roman stage, and he or she is declared venerable, having heroic virtue, then it moves on to additional study, of course, of the sanctity of the person's life. But two things really come to the fore. The next step would be being declared blessed. Ordinarily for that, a person has to have at least one miracle attributed to their intercession before God. God works the miracle, of course. Even saints can't do that on their own, with their own power. They don't have that power. But God listens to holy people and the prayers of holy people. And the intercession of the saints, the prayers of the saints to the Almighty, does indeed effect powerful interventions even in our lives. Miracles do happen. And if a miracle clearly attributable to the prayers of someone to a particular saint is verified, the Congregation for Saints, again, that group of cardinals and bishops in Rome, may well vote and recommend to the Holy Father that this venerable person of heroic virtue can also now be named a blessed. Ordinarily, the last stage of the process is very, very similar. A second miracle will be identified and verified so that the person can be named a saint. The naming of a person blessed, although it can be done in Rome, is often a major celebration with a representative of the Holy Father in the locality where the saint lived. Once upon a time, most of those celebrations were held in Rome, but Pope Francis especially, Pope Benedict before him a little bit, basically said, no. We need to emphasize that holiness doesn't just exist in Rome. It exists everywhere in the world. And this lets the place where the blessed person ministered, prayed, interacted with the local community. This is where the celebration of blessedness is best held.
And we have a good example of that one too that hopefully we'll be doing a show on, and that's Blessed Silos.
Absolutely.
In New Orleans at, is it St. Mary of the Assumption Church, the German church?
The German church.
In New Orleans, and his shrine is there. And so that's a show, hopefully, that we will showcase blessed through him.
Well, he's already been named blessed.
Yes.
If he is named a saint, and both the Archdiocese of New Orleans and the Redemptorist Order certainly hope that another miracle will be attributed to him so that he could be named a saint, then the last stage of the process, a canonization ceremony in Rome, will take place. He was named blessed, Blessed Silos was, in Rome.
Okay.
At that time, the Pope wasn't traveling himself to the locality to do these beatifications, they call them, naming a person blessed. And he wasn't necessarily designating a person to go to New Orleans or wherever to declare a person blessed. Nowadays, Pope Francis's preference is clearly to have the beatification ceremony in the local area.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I didn't realize that. I just knew he was at that stage for us to, he would definitely a holy.
Both of Mother Teresa's big ceremonies, when she was declared blessed, that happened in Rome, but she was a worldwide figure before she died.
Right.
And then, of course, her canonization ceremony also took place there in St. Peter's Square.
And as much as she is worldwide, Baton Rouge has a special affinity, to her.
She actually came here.
And she's been here more than once. And,
more than once.
and
Sat
her
and prayed
sisters
in
are
the
here,
cathedral.
yep.
Her sisters minister at St. Agnes.
So her connection to Baton Rouge is very strong.
That's right. once a person is named a saint, then they're, in a sense, the devotion to that person, the veneration of that person, can be done universally or worldwide. It still is fairly rare, though, for a saint to be inscribed on the universal calendar of the church so that the memorial or feast day of that saint is celebrated everywhere. You've probably noticed that Peter and Paul have a universal feast day, but even people as famous as Mother Teresa, for example, it takes the vote of the bishops of each and every country to decide whether or not to inscribe on their liturgical calendar the celebration of that particular person. I believe here in the United States, yes, Mother Teresa has been added to our calendar as a memorial, but there are many optional memorials, many saints around the world that remain fairly unknown here, not because they haven't officially been declared blessed or saint, but because we here don't celebrate them as much.
Case in point,
South Korea, some of those saints, yes. There are a couple of other curiosities about sainthood that probably deserve mention here. We've been talking about ordinary saints, like Saint Rene here, who has led a holy life. But there are other kinds of saints. The one that comes first to mind are martyrs, those who have been killed because of their faith. Either while professing their faith, I mean, think all of the martyrs thrown into the Colosseum in Rome, to be torn apart by the lions for the sport of the pagan Romans. These were people who were in the arena being killed because of their faith. And that didn't just happen hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Certainly the witness of many martyrs during World War II or during the Spanish Civil War back in the last century. They died because they were Christian. There has been a little bit of a change in recognizing that you don't have to necessarily die while professing your faith. If you basically were singled out because of your faith for execution, that's the kind of thing. Also, someone who would selflessly give their own life to save others. We've expanded the understanding of martyrdom a little bit.
I think I read that just recently.
Over the past century or so. There are many different ways for someone to lose their life, and when their very faith, was part of the cause or the motive and the reasoning behind it, or caused somebody else to make the death happen, that's worthy of recognition. That's a good way to put it. Martyrdom is the other way. Generally speaking, for martyrs, you don't need two miracles, but just one, because in a sense, the giving of their life was a miraculous thing, because it's supernatural. It's beyond the natural.
our comprehension.
You first.
I think we're on the same thought, because we were talking about this on break just now, about saints and feast days and the significance of that, correct?
Right. Well, I have mentioned the fact that there is a universal calendar in the church and local calendars for a particular nation, even for a particular diocese. Saints are always remembered or memorialized on somebody's liturgical calendar. Almost always the place where they lived and ministered, where they prayed and died. They don't always have an obligatory memorial. Admittedly, some saints are more popular in the sense than others. The most important saints have feasts. We have feasts of the apostles, for example, and of the Blessed Virgin Mary, as well as of the Lord, of course. We have memorials of major saints. For example, here in Louisiana, there's St. Vincent de Paul, St. Martin de Porres, some of the secondary patrons of the area. And we have regular optional memorials that we can use in our prayer, Mass, Liturgy of the Hours. Sometimes even major universal feast because of the oldness, the ancientness of a feast. St. Polycarp, for example. They're not necessarily well known here, and so are even if optional, oftentimes are left aside in favor of a more popular devotion. And devotion is sort of the last thing. We should pray to the saints. We should pray for their intercession before God for us ourselves. My warning is, don't just pray for miracles.
Right.
Pray for a holy life. Pray for support and strength. A good friend of mine is constantly going, give me strength, because that's what he says he needs just day in and day out to pursue his Christian vocation.
And there's saints for different they're
Patron saints.
patron saints of different things, such as Saint Anthony when I'm losing my keys, or anything else I lose, my baby. But I mean, that one comes to mind first. But
It's
they're
amazing.
for nurses. I used to pray. I think it's Saint Catherine, Saint Cecilia for music. I mean, I was always those two areas. So those were the two I prayed to often. So they were given
these
that too.
these are very popular ways of bringing the devotion to a saint into our life. Which saint would be the particular good patron for you? Saint Paul, Saint Anne, Saint Renee, and
Saint Catherine.
Saint
My middle
Catherine.
name is
That's
Catherine.
right. I'm thinking of your mother.
My mom,
Anne,
Saint
yeah. But in a sense, Saint Anne is the patron saint of mothers.
Right.
And so you qualify
Because she's
there.
the mother of Blessed Mother.
That's right. These are ways to make the devotion to the saints part of your own religious life, your own spirituality. And we miss something if we're only focused upon biblical stories of Christ and events that happened there. We really are enriched by including the lived experience of holy people down through the centuries all this time.
Well, thank you for being on the show. We've learned so much, and hopefully we'll be able to explore some of these people that have visited Louisiana, these holy people. So join us again for another episode of Roots of Faith.